What happens when your soulmate, the one you've dreamed of your entire life, looks at you with disgust? For Elena, a gentle Omega, meeting her fated mate was supposed to be the most magical day of her life. But he wasn't just any wolf. He was Prince Kale, the future Alpha King. In front of the entire werewolf kingdom, he shattered her world with a single brutal word: reject. Humiliated and heartbroken, her life was over. But as she fell to her knees, a different shadow fell over her, a figure of immense power whose authority was absolute. It was his father, the Alpha King, and in a voice that shook the very foundations of their world, he made a declaration that would change everything. The air in the capital city of Eldoria hummed with an energy that vibrated deep in Elena's bones. It was the night of the lunar convergence, a centennial event where werewolves from every pack across the continent gathered under the twin moons to find their fated mates. For an Omega from the small provincial Silver Creek pack, it was overwhelming. The scents alone were a dizzying tapestry of power, ambition, and hope. Pine from the northern mountain packs, salt from the coastal clans, and the sharp, imposing scent of ozone and steel that belonged only to the royal Blood Moon pack. Elena smoothed down the simple silver dress her mother had sewn for her. It was elegant, but it couldn't hide the subtle tremble in her hands. As an Omega, she was at the bottom of the lycanthrope hierarchy. Omegas were nurturers, caretakers, valued for their calming presence, but never for their strength. The idea that her fated mate could be here among these powerful alphas and betas was both thrilling and terrifying. Just breathe, Elena. Her pack alpha, a kind aging wolf named Michael, murmured beside her. The moon goddess makes no mistakes. She gave him a grateful smile, but her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her senses were on fire. Then a scent cut through the cacophony. It was unlike anything she'd ever known, a rich, intoxicating blend of ancient forest, crackling embers, and a storm gathering over the mountains. It was a scent of absolute power and command, and it called to a place in her soul she didn't know existed. Her head snapped up, her eyes scanning the grand plaza, and then she saw him. Prince Kale, heir to the Alpha King's throne, stood on the grand dais, flanked by his royal guards. He was everything the legends said. Tall and powerfully built, with hair as black as a moonless night and eyes the color of molten gold. He exuded an aura of confidence that bordered on arrogance. At that moment, his gaze swept the crowd, and his golden eyes locked with hers. Time stopped. The noise of the 1,000-strong crowd faded to a dull hum. Elena saw a flicker of shock in his eyes, a mirroring of the profound recognition flooding her own veins. The mate bond, a sacred and unbreakable connection forged by the goddess herself, slammed into them both with the force of a physical blow. Her wolf, a gentle spirit that rarely stirred, rose up and howled in joy within her. Mate! A slow smile spread across Kale's handsome face. He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. The crowd began to part before him as he descended from the dais, his focus singular. Elena's breath hitched. This couldn't be real. An Omega and the future Alpha King. It was the stuff of impossible fairy tales. He stopped a few feet from her. The air between them crackled. He inhaled deeply, his expression unreadable as he fully registered her scent. Wild lavender and morning dew. It was a gentle, unassuming scent, an Omega's scent. She watched as the recognition in his eyes was slowly replaced by a storm of conflicting emotions, confusion, then disbelief, and finally a chilling flicker of disappointment. Beside him, a beautiful, statuesque she-wolf with fiery red hair and predatory grace stepped closer. Elena recognized her as Lady Seraphina, the alpha daughter of the powerful Iron Ridge pack. Her scent was cinnamon and iron, a warrior's scent. She placed a possessive hand on Cal's arm, her lips curling into a sneer as she looked Elena up and down with open contempt. An Omega! Seraphina's voice was a silky, venomous whisper meant only for the prince, but Elena's keen hearing caught it. The goddess must be joking. Cale's jaw tightened. He looked from Seraphina's powerful form back to Elena's delicate frame. He saw her simple dress, her wide, hopeful eyes, and the label of her rank that seemed branded on her very soul. He was the future king. His Luna needed to be a symbol of strength, a political asset, an alpha who could command armies and birth powerful alpha heirs. Not this. The joy in Elena's chest began to curdle into ice. The prince's internal battle was written plainly on his face, and she knew with sickening certainty which side was winning. Prince Cale's hesitation lasted only a moment, but for Elena it stretched into an eternity of dawning horror. The beautiful, sacred bond that had just bloomed between them was already beginning to wither under the frost of his ambition. He took a final step forward, closing the space between them. The entire plaza had fallen silent, all eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. This was the moment of acceptance, the most cherished ritual of their people. Elena's heart dared a final desperate flutter of hope. Perhaps he would defy convention. Perhaps the bond was strong enough. Cale looked directly into her eyes, his own golden gaze now as cold and hard as a statue's. His voice, when it came, was not the loving whisper of a mate, but the formal, booming tone of a prince making a royal decree. I, Prince Cale of the Blood Moon Pack, heir to the Alpha throne, he began, his voice ringing with authority, leaving no room for doubt. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. This was not the traditional acceptance. This was the language of law, of judgment. Elena's world tilted. No, she whispered, the word a faint puff of air. I acknowledge that the moon goddess has presented you before me, he continued, his words like stones pelting her heart. But the future of this kingdom requires a Luna of strength and power. It requires an alpha. He cast a meaningful glance at Seraphina, who preened under his attention. The throne cannot be shared with an Omega. The word hung in the air, an indictment, a curse. Omega. Tears welled in Elena's eyes, hot and sharp. The pain was indescribable. It was more than rejection. It was the severing of her very soul. Her wolf whimpered, a sound of pure agony that echoed in the hollow space of her chest. He raised his voice for all to hear, his final words a death sentence to her spirit. And so, before this assembly and under the eyes of the goddess, I, Cale of the Blood Moon Pack, reject you, Elena of the Silver Creek Pack, as my fated mate and future Luna. Reject. The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. A searing, white-hot pain tore through her chest, erupting from the point of the mate bond and spreading like poison through every nerve. She cried out, a raw, wounded sound, and staggered back, clutching her chest as if to hold herself together. It felt like her soul was being ripped in two. The beautiful scent of forest and storm was now tainted with the acrid stench of betrayal. The crowd erupted in a roar of shocked whispers and murmurs. Some looked at her with pity, others with scorn. To be rejected was the ultimate shame, a stain that could never be washed away. To be rejected so publicly by the heir to the throne was a fate worse than death. Humiliation washed over her, a hot tide that threatened to drown her. Her knees buckled, no longer able to support the weight of her broken heart. She collapsed onto the cold stone of the plaza, her silver dress pooling around her like a shroud. The world swam before her tear-filled eyes. She could see Cale turning away from her without a second glance, moving back toward Seraphina, who welcomed him with a triumphant smirk. He had made his choice. Power over destiny, ambition over love. Elena's world narrowed to the crushing pain in her chest and the sound of her own ragged sobs. This was it. Her life was over. She was the rejected Omega, a pariah, a living symbol of a prince's pragmatism. She would never recover. But as she lay broken on the ground, a new shadow fell over her. It was vast and imposing, silencing the crowd in an instant. A palpable wave of power, far greater than Cale's, washed over the plaza. It was an ancient primal power that commanded respect and demanded silence. A pair of large leather boots stopped just before her. Elena slowly, painfully lifted her gaze. She looked up past a powerful frame, clad in dark regal attire, and into a pair of eyes the color of liquid silver, eyes that held the wisdom of ages, the burden of leadership, and a flicker of something she couldn't identify, a deep, soul-shaking sorrow. It was King Theron, the Alpha King, Cale's father. His face was a mask of stoic fury, his jaw set like granite. He wasn't looking at his son, he was looking at her, and the intensity in his gaze made the air crackle. King Theron's presence changed the very atmosphere of the plaza. Where there had been chaotic murmurs, there was now a tomb-like silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. His power was a living thing, a heavy cloak of authority that settled over everyone, reminding them who truly ruled. He ignored his son completely. His silver eyes remained fixed on Elena, who was still crumpled on the ground, a broken doll in a silver dress. The look in his eyes wasn't one of pity, but of profound, almost personal anger, the anger of a king who had just witnessed a sacred law being desecrated in his own court. "Get up, child," he commanded. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble, like stones grinding together deep within the earth. It wasn't a request. With trembling limbs, Elena forced herself to her knees, then shakily to her feet. She couldn't meet his gaze, her eyes fixed on the ground as tears continued to trace silent paths down her cheeks. King Theron took a step closer, and Elena flinched, expecting more scorn, more judgment. Instead, he simply stood before her, a mountain of silent fury. He finally turned his head, and his gaze, now glacial, fell upon his son. "Cale," he said, and the single word was laced with more disappointment than 1,000 lectures. Prince Cale, who had been basking in Seraphina's admiration, straightened up, his arrogance faltering under his father's immense presence. "Father, I did what was necessary for the kingdom. A strong Luna—" "You will be silent." The king cut him off, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet that was more terrifying than any roar. "You have forgotten the most fundamental law of our people. The mate bond is a gift from the goddess. It is not a political contract to be discarded for convenience. You have not only shamed this girl, you have insulted the goddess herself, and you have shamed your lineage." Each word was a lash. Cale flinched, his face paling. Seraphina, for all her alpha bravado, wisely took a step back, trying to distance herself from the king's wrath. King Theron turned his attention back to Elena. The pain radiating from her was a palpable thing, a scent of crushed lavender and heartbroken tears. He saw the mark of the rejection beginning to form over her heart, a faint silvery scar that would deepen with time, a permanent symbol of her shame. A deep, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of pure protective rage that made several nearby wolves instinctively lower their heads in submission. He then did something no one could have predicted. The Alpha King, ruler of all werewolves, gently reached out and placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. His touch was surprisingly warm, and a sliver of strength seemed to flow from him into her, steadying her trembling frame. He addressed the entire assembly, his voice now imbued with the absolute power of the Alpha of Alphas. It rolled across the plaza like thunder, leaving no room for argument. "What my son has done here tonight is a stain upon the honor of the Blood Moon Pack," he declared. "He has chosen ambition over destiny. He has deemed this Omega unworthy. He is wrong." He let the words hang in the air, a direct challenge to the prejudice held by so many. In his foolishness, he has cast aside a gift. But the crown does not suffer such waste. The crown does not abide such dishonor. He looked down at Elena, his silver eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "You are Elena of the Silver Creek Pack, are you not?" She could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. "Your pack will be compensated for this grievous insult," he stated. Then his gaze swept the crowd once more. "And you," he said, his voice rising again, "will not be cast out. You will not be an object of shame." He drew her forward slightly, forcing her to stand at his side. He was publicly aligning himself with her. Cale's face was a mask of disbelief and fury. This was a direct rebuke of his authority, his decision. Then came the decree that shattered every rule of their society. "As of this moment," the Alpha King boomed, his voice resonating with a power that seemed to shake the very moons in the sky, "Elena of the Silver Creek Pack is under my personal protection. She will reside in the royal palace as my ward. Her word will be my word, her safety, my command. An insult to her is an insult to the throne. An attack on her is an attack on me." He paused, letting the weight of his declaration settle. Then he delivered the final, world-shaking blow. "My son rejected her, so I, the Alpha King, claim her. She is now mine to protect." The world exploded into chaos. Cries of shock and disbelief echoed through the plaza. He hadn't claimed her as a mate, not in the traditional sense, but his words were an undeniable claim of possession and responsibility. He had taken the rejected Omega and placed her under the shelter of his own immense power, elevating her from the lowest pariah to the king's personal ward. In a single breath, Elena stared up at him, her mind reeling. She felt the weight of his hand on her shoulder, a solid grounding presence in the storm of her emotions. Why? Why would the most powerful wolf in the world do this for a nobody? An Omega, his own son, had just thrown away like trash? King Theron paid no mind to the uproar. He simply looked down at Elena, his silver eyes holding a universe of secrets. "Come," he said softly, his voice for her alone. "Let us leave this place." And with his hand still firmly on her shoulder, the Alpha King guided the broken Omega away from the scene of her humiliation, leading her toward the gleaming spires of the royal palace and into a future more complicated and dangerous than she could ever have imagined. The royal palace was a masterpiece of stone and magic, a breathtaking fortress of soaring towers and shimmering obsidian walls. To Elena, it felt like a prison, a beautiful gilded cage where she was the exotic, broken specimen on display. In the days following the convergence, she was moved into a suite of rooms more luxurious than her entire family home, with silks and velvets in deep blues and silvers, and a balcony that overlooked the royal gardens. Yet every luxury felt like a mockery. Servants bowed to her, addressing her as "my lady," their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. The palace guard's elite alpha warriors straightened whenever she passed, their gazes averted. King Theron's decree had given her a status no Omega had ever held, but it had also painted a target on her back. She was an anomaly, a disruption to the natural order, and the whispers followed her like a shadow. She spent most of her time in her rooms, the pain of the severed bond, a constant throbbing ache in her chest. Sometimes it was a dull emptiness, other times a sharp stabbing agony that left her breathless. She would catch Cale's scent on the palace breeze, forest and embers, and the pain would flare so intensely she'd have to grip the furniture to stay upright. Cale, for his part, avoided her entirely. She heard from a nervous beta handmaiden named Lyra that the prince was furious, locked in a battle of wills with his father. He saw the king's protection of her as a personal and political betrayal, an undermining of his authority as the heir. He paraded Serafina around the court, a defiant gesture to show everyone where his allegiance lay. Serafina, in turn, never missed an opportunity to torment Elena. Though she never dared to touch her, her words were like poisoned darts. "Enjoying your charity, sweet Omega." she drawled one afternoon, cornering Elena in a hallway. "You must be so grateful. The king took pity on you, a stray dog brought in from the cold. But don't get comfortable. A king's pity is fleeting." Elena simply stared back, her silence a better defense than any words she could muster. She was learning to build walls around her broken heart. Her only refuge was King Theron. He would summon her to his private study each evening. The room was filled with ancient books and maps smelling of old parchment and leather, and the king's unique scent of aged oak and winter snow. It was a scent that, unlike his son's, brought her a strange sense of calm. He never treated her with pity. He treated her with quiet, solemn respect that baffled her. He would ask about her home, the Silver Creek pack, about her family. He listened intently as she spoke of her love for painting, a humble pastime she'd never shared with anyone. One evening, as they sat in comfortable silence, a log fire crackling in the hearth, Elena finally found the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Why? Why are you doing this for me?" King Theron looked up from the treaty he was reading. His silver eyes seemed to look right through her, into the fractured pieces of her soul. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant as if looking into the past. "My son is a fool," he said finally, his voice low and heavy with ancient sorrow. "He sees power in titles and alliances. He does not understand true strength, the kind of strength you have." "Strength?" Elena gave a bitter, humorless laugh. "I am an Omega. I fell apart in a public square. What strength is that?" "The strength to endure," he corrected her gently. "The strength to feel so deeply and not be consumed by bitterness. The strength of a quiet spirit in a world that only values the roar of an alpha." He paused, his expression turning pensive. "You remind me of someone." Before she could ask who, he stood and walked over to a heavy velvet curtain that covered a section of the wall. "For generations, the history of our people has been written by alphas. We celebrate the conquerors, the warriors. We hide what we perceive as our weaknesses." With a heavy sigh, he pulled the cord. The curtain slid back to reveal a large, beautifully framed portrait that had clearly been hidden for a very long time. It depicted a she-wolf of breathtaking beauty with kind, intelligent eyes and a gentle smile. Her scent, magically preserved in the painting's oils, wafted toward Elena, a faint ethereal fragrance of night-blooming jasmine and rain. An Omega's scent. But it wasn't the scent or the beauty that made Elena gasp. It was the circlet on the woman's brow, the Luna Queen's crown. "This," King Theron said, his voice thick with emotion, "was my mate, your queen, Lyra." Elena stared, dumbfounded. She was an Omega. "She was the most powerful person I ever knew," he affirmed, his voice cracking slightly. "Her empathy could soothe the most savage rage. Her intuition could unravel plots that my best spies missed. She was the heart of this kingdom, and I loved her more than my own life." He looked back at Elena, and now she understood the sorrow in his eyes. It was grief. "We kept her rank a secret. The council was traditional. They believed an Omega Queen would be a sign of weakness. I was a young king, and I bowed to their pressure. It is my life's greatest regret. She lived her life in shadow, loved by me but never truly seen by her people for who she was. She died 20 years ago, birthing Kale." The pieces clicked into place. His anger at Kale's rejection, his immediate fierce protection of her. He wasn't just protecting a wronged girl. He was honoring the memory of his lost love. He was righting a past wrong through her. "My son has his mother's eyes, but he doesn't have her heart," Theron said, his voice laced with pain. "He has inherited my pride, but not, it seems, my wisdom. When he rejected you, he rejected her memory. He rejected the truth of our own family, and I will not allow that to happen again." He turned to face her fully, his silver eyes blazing with new, fierce purpose. Kale thinks an Omega cannot be a Luna. I am going to prove him wrong. I am going to show this kingdom what true power looks like. I am going to train you, Elena, not to be a warrior, but to be a queen." King Theron's training was unlike anything Elena could have imagined. There were no lessons in swordplay or battle strategy. Instead, he taught her the art of silent power. Her days were filled with lessons on history, law, and diplomacy, taught by the king himself. He showed her how to read a treaty not for what it said, but for what it omitted. He taught her to listen to the whisper networks of the palace servants, explaining that they knew more truths than any royal council member. He began to hone her Omega abilities, which she had always viewed as weaknesses, and reframe them as strengths. Her heightened empathy wasn't a vulnerability, it was a tool. During a tense negotiation with the stubborn Alpha from the Stonefang pack, a grizzled old wolf named David, Theron brought her into the chamber. The Alpha was belligerent, making impossible demands. The King's Council was growing angry, their Alpha's tempers flaring. "Elena," Theron said calmly, drawing everyone's attention, "what do you sense?" Hesitantly, she focused on Alpha David. Beneath his bluster and anger, her empathy picked up a different scent, fear and deep, gnawing grief. "He is not angry, Your Majesty," she said softly, her voice carrying in the silent room. "He is afraid. His youngest son. He is sick with river fever. Isn't he, Alpha David? You are not demanding more territory. You need the moon petal herbs that only grow in the royal gardens to save him." The old Alpha stared at her, his jaw dropping. His aggressive facade crumbled, revealing the desperate father beneath. His shoulders slumped. "How did you know?" he rasped. "Your grief sensed the air more strongly than your anger," she replied gently. Theron immediately ordered his personal healers to provide the herbs. The alliance was saved, not by threats or power plays, but by an Omega's empathy. The council members looked at Elena with newfound grudging respect. The king also encouraged her art. He converted a sunroom into a studio for her, providing her with the finest charcoals and canvases. But he gave her an unusual assignment. "Paint the court," he told her, "but don't paint their faces, paint their spirits. Paint what you see behind their masks." Do. Her charcoals became astonishingly insightful. She drew Seraphina not as a beautiful she-wolf, but as a tangle of thorny vines, beautiful, but suffocating everything they touched. She drew Kale as a magnificent wolf, chained to a heavy, ornate throne, unable to run free. When Theron saw it, he simply nodded, a sad understanding in his eyes. Her confidence grew with each passing week. She began to hold her head high, her walk gaining quiet grace. The palace staff, who once whispered about the pity Omega, now came to her with their problems, knowing she would listen with compassion they couldn't find elsewhere. She was building her own network of loyalty based not on fear, but on kindness. Kale watched this transformation with growing confusion and irritation. He had expected her to waste away, a broken shell of a wolf. Instead, she was blooming under his father's tutelage. He would see her in the gardens advising the royal herbalist, or in the library debating history with the court scholar. She carried herself with quiet dignity that was more captivating than Seraphina's loud, aggressive beauty. The lingering embers of the mate bond tormented him. Sometimes he would catch her scent, lavender and dew, and an inexplicable longing would pierce through his arrogance. He saw the respect she was earning and felt a bitter, unfamiliar sting of regret. He had cast her aside for being weak, yet she was demonstrating a different kind of strength, one he had never bothered to understand. His frustration boiled over one evening when he confronted his father in the throne room. "What is the meaning of this?" Kale demanded, gesturing vaguely toward the palace. "You parade her around like some sort of prodigy. You're making me a laughingstock, the prince who threw away the king's new pet." "She is not a pet." Theron's voice was cold steel. She is a guest of the crown, and she is more of a leader in her silence than you are with all your proclamations. You chose your path, Kale. You chose Seraphina. You chose the approval of shallow alphas who believe strength is only measured in the force of a blow. Let me ask you, has Seraphina eased a single political tension? Has she earned the love of the people? Or does she simply sharpen her claws and plot for more power? Kale had no answer. Seraphina's constant ambition was already beginning to grate on him. You saw a title, Theron continued, his voice heavy with disappointment. I see a soul. You looked at Elena and saw an Omega. I looked at her and saw your mother's legacy, a legacy you spat upon. The mention of his mother was a blow Kale could not deflect. He recoiled as if struck, his face a mixture of anger and shame. He stormed out of the throne room, his mind in turmoil. Later that night, driven by an impulse he didn't understand, he went to Elena's studio. The door was ajar, and he looked inside. She was standing before a large canvas, her back to him. Moonlight streamed through the windows, bathing her in a silver glow. She was painting, and the image taking shape on the canvas made his breath catch in his throat. It was a portrait of King Theron, but more than that, she had captured him perfectly, the weight of his crown, the sadness in his eyes, but also the immense kindness and strength that held the kingdom together. She had painted the man, not just the king. As he watched, a single tear traced a path down her cheek, and she reached up to wipe it away. In that unguarded moment, the rejected mate bond flared to life within him, a searing pang of loss and regret, so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. He had thrown this away, this depth, this understanding, this soul, and in his blindness, he had handed her directly to the one man he could never compete with, his own father. The whispers that had once followed Elena down palace corridors had escaped the capital's walls, twisting and metastasizing into something far more dangerous. They became the seeds of rebellion, carefully planted and nurtured by the cunning Lord Valerius of Iron Ridge. He was a master of political theater, never speaking of treason outright. Instead, he spoke of tradition, of strength, and of the purity of the Alpha line. At councils and clandestine meetings with other hardline alphas, he would lament the king's grief-addled judgment, suggesting that Theron's lingering sorrow for his lost Omega mate had made him sentimental and weak. The moon goddess provides us with a hierarchy for a reason, he would argue, his voice a convincing baritone of feigned concern. Alphas to lead, betas to support, and omegas to nurture. When we disrupt this sacred order, we invite chaos. The king, in his compassion, has placed a fox in charge of the den. What will become of our strength, our future? His daughter Seraphina was the public face of this simmering insurrection. She moved through the court like a beautiful venomous serpent, her words dripping with poison disguised as loyalty. She cultivated a circle of high-born she-wolves, feeding them tales of Elena's unnatural influence. She whispered that Elena used subtle Omega pheromones, a forbidden form of mind control, to cloud the king's mind and alienate him from his own son. The story was ludicrous, but in a court rife with jealousy and fear of change, it found fertile ground. Kale was trapped in the center of this web. His public alliance with Seraphina forced him to stand by as she and her father undermined the throne. Yet every day, his regret deepened into a gnawing wound. He saw the kingdom his father had built, a kingdom of stability and immense power, being threatened by the very people he had aligned himself with. He watched Elena from afar, witnessing her quiet competence. He saw her mediate a dispute between two beta cooks with gentle wisdom that averted a larger staff conflict. He saw her walking the gardens with his father, their heads bent together in conversation, a picture of serene partnership that made his soul ache with the pain of a phantom limb. The faint lingering scent of lavender and morning dew on the palace air was a constant agonizing reminder of the catastrophic mistake he had made. He had chosen a partner for power, and in doing so, had empowered those who now sought to tear his own family apart. The tension was set to detonate at the annual Harvest Festival, the kingdom's most important celebration. It was Elena's first official public appearance at a major court event since the night of her rejection. A palpable fear coiled in her stomach, but it was a cold, manageable thing now, not the paralyzing terror of before. King Theron's training had forged a core of steel within her. As she prepared, she chose not a gown of meek silver or apologetic gray, but a deep forest green, the color of ancient woods and quiet strength. It complemented the confidence in her posture and the clarity in her eyes. When she descended the grand staircase to meet Theron, he didn't offer a shallow compliment on her beauty. Instead, his silver eyes warmed with profound approval. "You look like a queen," he murmured, the words a balm to the last of her old scars. As they entered the great hall, a wave of silence preceded them, followed by a cacophony of whispers. Elena kept her chin high, her gaze steady, as she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. She could practically see the battle lines drawn across the room. The king's loyalists offered deep, respectful bows. The faction aligned with Lord Valerius, however, gave shallow, almost insulting nods, their eyes filled with contempt. Cale stood near the head table with Seraphina, who was a blaze of fiery crimson. He watched Elena walk at his father's side, not behind him, but as an equal. She moved with a grace that seemed to emanate from her very spirit. She was no longer the terrified, trembling girl from the Convergence. She was magnificent, and the sight of her beside Theron sent a vicious spike of jealousy and loss through him. Seraphina noticed his gaze, and her lips thinned into a venomous line. The feast began, a tense affair of forced pleasantries and veiled insults. Finally, as the main course was cleared, Seraphina rose from her seat, her goblet held high. A malicious gleam shone in her eyes. This was her moment. "A toast!" she called out, her voice sharp and carrying, silencing the hall. She smiled, a predator's baring of teeth. "I wish to toast the future of our great kingdom, a future that must be secured by strength and tradition, a future guided by a true alpha line, untainted by weakness, a future led by a strong alpha Luna who can stand beside her mate on the battlefield, not one who needs to hide behind the king's charity and the shadows of the nursery." The insult was as sharp and public as a beheading. The hall froze. Elena felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, but she met Seraphina's gaze without flinching. Before King Theron could unleash the thunderous rage gathering in his expression, Cale moved. A guttural growl ripped from his chest, a sound so primal and full of fury that wolves near him physically recoiled. "You will be silent, Seraphina," he snarled. She stared at him, her triumphant smirk faltering into shock. "Cale, I am defending your honor, our future." "My honor is my own to defend," he shot back, his golden eyes blazing with a fire that seemed to burn away months of weakness and indecision. "And you do not speak for me. You speak only for your own ambition." He turned away from her, dismissing her completely, and faced the stunned assembly. His gaze fell upon his father, then finally upon Elena. The raw agony in his eyes was plain for all to see. "My actions at the lunar convergence were my own," he announced, his voice ringing with pained, terrible clarity, "and they were the greatest mistake of my life." Gasps echoed through the hall. Lord Valerius's face hardened into a mask of fury at his future son-in-law's betrayal. "I was a coward," Cale confessed, his voice breaking. "I was an arrogant fool, blinded by politics and pride. I looked at the purest gift the goddess could offer, and I valued it less than the whispers of ambitious alphas." He looked directly at Elena, his heart in his eyes. "You have shown more strength, more honor, and more grace in the face of my cruelty than I have ever shown in my life. I rejected you for being weak, and I was the weak one." He took a decisive step toward her, away from Serafina, closing the space between them. The air crackled with impossible hope. A rejection spoken in foolishness can be rescinded by a mate who has found his senses. Elena, his voice dropped, becoming a desperate plea. I was wrong. I see that now. I am asking you before this court and the goddess to forgive my blindness. Accept me now. Be my Luna. He was trying to undo it all, to reclaim the destiny he had shattered. The dormant mate bond pulsed between them, a confusing echo of pain and potential. A part of her, the ghost of the girl she used to be, wanted to yield, to let the fated bond heal them both and end the agony. But then she looked at him, truly looked at him. She saw not a changed man, but a cornered prince, making a desperate political move to save himself and his kingdom from a fire he had helped kindle. And then she looked at Theron. He remained silent, a mountain of strength beside her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes conveyed a single, powerful message. This is your choice. You have earned it. He had not saved her to control her. He had freed her to choose. That clarity settled everything. Elena took a slow, deliberate breath, and when she spoke, her voice was not the whisper of an omega, but the clear, resonant tone of a queen. Prince Kael? She began, meeting his desperate gaze with calm, sad strength. I remember the man who looked at me as if I were dirt beneath his boot. I remember the agony of my soul being torn in two by your decree. You speak of mistakes and blindness now, but your eyes were only opened when your own future became uncertain. You do not ask for me. You ask for a solution to the rebellion you allowed to fester. She took a step back, her movement firm and final, the physical embodiment of her decision. The bond from the goddess was a sacred gift. You did not just set it aside. You trampled it in the mud of your own ambition. You cannot now demand I retrieve it for you simply because it has become convenient. Her gaze was unwavering, filled not with the fire of anger, but with the cool, unshakable certainty of self-worth. I am not a crown to be reclaimed when your other toys are broken. I am not the remedy for your political ailments. She held his gaze and delivered the final liberating blow. I, Elena of the Silver Creek Pack, acknowledge your apology, and I uphold your rejection. The bond is broken by your own hand. I will not be your Luna, not now, not ever. A shattering silence descended upon the hall. Kael stared at her, the color draining from his face. He had been rejected. The future king rejected by the Omega he had discarded. Before anyone could react to the monumental shift in power, the great doors of the hall burst open. A royal guard, his armor dented and his face pale with terror, stumbled in. "Your Majesty!" he cried out, his voice choked with panic. "The northern garrisons, Lord Valerius has rallied them. They have taken the arsenal and are marching on the capital as we speak. He has declared the king unfit to rule and claims the throne for a true alpha line." The personal drama was instantly vaporized by the fire of open war. The rebellion had begun. Chaos erupted. Lord Valerius had used the festival as a distraction, moving his forces while the capital was celebrating. Theron's face became a mask of cold fury. He was a king again, a warrior. "To arms!" he roared. His commanders instantly moved to rally the royal guard. Kael, stunned by Elena's rejection and the news of the betrayal, was momentarily paralyzed. Then his own alpha instincts took over. "I will lead the eastern flank," he declared, his eyes meeting his father's. A silent truce passed between them. This was about the kingdom now. As the alphas prepared for war, a sense of panic began to grip the non-combatants in the palace. Elena, however, felt a strange calm settle over her. Theron's training had prepared her for this. While the warriors planned their battles, she knew another war had to be fought. The war for the hearts and minds of the people. If they panicked, the city would fall from within. She found the palace's head housekeeper, a matronly beta named Clara, who was trying to calm a group of hysterical servants. "Clara," Elena said, her voice steady and clear, "gather all the omegas and betas. We have work to do." While the alphas sharpened their swords, Elena organized the others. They established makeshift infirmaries, organized food and water supplies for the city's defenders, and created safe zones for the children and elderly. Her calming Omega presence, amplified by her newfound authority, worked like a balm on the frayed nerves of the populace. They saw her not as a weak Omega, but as a beacon of hope and order in the midst of chaos. She was doing what she did best, nurturing and protecting. She was being a Luna in deed, if not in name. The fighting at the city gates was brutal. Lord Valerius's forces were strong, fueled by righteous fury and a desire to upend the old order. Collet fought with the desperation of a man trying to atone for his sins. His prowess on the battlefield undeniable. Theron was a force of nature, his ancient power sweeping aside any who dared to challenge him. But Valerius had an advantage. His spies within the city had sabotaged the Western Gate's reinforcement mechanism. It was about to fail, which would allow the rebel army to flood into the city. A messenger, bleeding and weak, brought the news to the infirmary where Elena was tending to the wounded. Elena's mind raced. The gate would fall in minutes. The warriors were too far away to get there in time. There was no one to stop them. No alphas, perhaps. "Clara," Elena said, her eyes blazing with fierce new light. "Bar this door. Protect the children. I have an idea." Ignoring Clara's protests, Elena ran from the infirmary. She didn't run for a sword, but for the one thing she knew could stop an army of enraged werewolves. She ran to the great bell tower in the center of the city. According to legend, the Bell of Eldoria had been forged with Omega magic. It was said its toll could soothe the most savage beast, calming the rage in a wolf's heart. It hadn't been rung in centuries. She reached the tower and began to climb the winding stone steps, her lungs burning. At the top, she found the enormous bronze bell hanging silent. A massive wooden beam was used to ring it. It would take the strength of 2 alphas to move it. She placed her hands on the beam and pushed. It didn't budge. Tears of frustration pricked her eyes. It was hopeless. The shouts from the western gate were getting louder. It had been breached. Just as she was about to give up, another pair of hands joined hers on the beam. She looked up to see King Theron, his silver eyes meeting hers. He was covered in dust and blood, a deep gash on his arm. But he was there. "You never cease to amaze me, Elena," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They've broken through." "I know," she panted. "Let's give them a proper welcome." Together they pushed. The beam moved slowly, then gained momentum. It struck the bell with a mighty crash, but it wasn't a sound. It was a wave of pure calming energy that washed over the entire city. It was the concentrated essence of an Omega's power, amplified 1,000 times. On the battlefield, wolves in the throes of bloodlust stopped mid-snarl. The rage in their hearts was doused, replaced by profound peace and clarity. They looked at the blood on their claws, at their fallen brethren, as if waking from a nightmare. The rebellion's momentum died in an instant. Lord Valerius, his face contorted in confusion, found his will to fight had simply vanished. The royal guard, less affected due to their sworn loyalty to the king, quickly surrounded and disarmed the dazed rebels. The battle was over, won not by tooth and claw, but by the chimes of a bell pushed by an Omega and her king. In the stunned silence that followed, Theron and Elena stood in the bell tower, looking down at the saved city. He turned to her, his silver eyes filled with an emotion she had never seen before. Not just respect, not just admiration, but deep, profound love, the kind of love that recognizes a kindred soul. Lyra used to tell me that the greatest power wasn't the ability to command, but the ability to heal, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He gently touched the silvery rejection scar over her heart. "My son gave you this scar." He broke a bond of fate. He then took her hand, his large, warm palm enveloping hers. "Perhaps fate is not a single straight line. Perhaps it is a river that finds its way to the sea even after being diverted." He looked into her eyes, and she finally understood. His protection, his training, his respect, it had all been building to this. He hadn't just been honoring his dead wife. He had been falling in love with the woman standing in front of him. And she, in turn, had found in him not just a savior, but a partner, a true mate for her soul, chosen not by a mystical bond but by shared trials and mutual respect. "He rejected you as his fated Luna," King Theron said, his voice resonating with power and love. "So now I ask you, Elena of Silver Creek, will you be my chosen queen?" Tears streamed down Elena's face, but this time they were tears of joy. Her own heart, which she thought was irreparably broken, felt whole and soaring. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." In the aftermath, Cale, humbled and defeated, unconditionally accepted his father's judgment. He was stripped of his title as heir for a period of 10 years, sent to work with the Outer Pacts to learn humility and true leadership. He accepted his punishment with quiet dignity, giving Elena a final look of profound respect and loss before he left. Elena, the rejected Omega, stood beside her king, her hand in his. She was crowned Luna Queen not long after, her Omega rank now a symbol not of weakness, but of a new kind of strength that had saved them all. She had lost a fated mate, but she had found a chosen one, and with him, a destiny far grander than she had ever dreamed. And so Elena's journey comes not to an end, but to a new beginning. She teaches us that a rejection is not a final chapter, but a redirection. True strength isn't always found in a warrior's roar, but in the quiet resilience of a gentle heart. Her story is a testament to the idea that our worth is not defined by the rank we are born with or by who refuses us, but by the choices we make and the love we choose to accept. The Alpha King saw in her what his son was blind to, a queen in spirit long before she wore a crown. If you were moved by Elena's journey from a rejected Omega to a beloved queen, and if you believe in the power of second chances and chosen love, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next epic tale. What did you think of the king's decision? Let us know in the comments below.